Hey, all, welcome back to Cinematicians. My name is Joe Alvarez, and I'm the host of this show. Um, so I have not been active for a couple months now. Some some of it was due to traveling a good bit. Another part of it was due to well, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not 100% certain as to what I'm doing with this show. I am trying to bring in my own personal opinions about movies, my own personal love of movies. I love bringing in people who are also love to talk about movies. Sometimes I am trying to figure out exactly what I want to say, how I want to say it, and say it just right. I'm a bit of a perfectionist that way, and this is kind of a solo project for me. So I'm just trying to work things out. Um, in the meantime, for this video, I just kind of want to go over two things. First one is Angel Studios' Cabrini movie came out about 2 months ago. I had a review written up. I posted a short one almost as soon as I got out of the theater on Instagram. So you can go to my Instagram page and check that out. One I haven't really talked about, though, which I've been meaning to talk about for a while, and I just haven't been sure how to do it, is the TV show, Apple TV original Ted Lasso. Um, so I'm just gonna breeze through that as best I can. Um, Try and make these videos a little shorter than they have been. All right, so Angel Studios has come out with a new film, Cabrini. Now, like many of you, I am often a little wary of Christian films, as for the past 20 years or so, some companies have decided to take on movies having directly to do with the idea of faith. Now, that quality alone is nothing to complain about. I'm all for evangelization through the medium of film. But what so frequently occurs is not an artistic depiction of human struggles, but rather a kind of sermon on the screen. It deals more often in the broad and abstract struggle with the idea of God in general, if he is good, if you are enough, if he even exists, etc. It's a lot of feel good uh, concepts regarding the idea of faith, God, and morals. This is all well and good, but the execution of it can be a little more self affirming than is necessary. It ends up preaching to the choir and some iffy attempts to attract people to the faith. People don't want to hear sermon after sermon on the screen, debate after debate. They don't want they all they want to see is the drama of the real human struggle and how it all works out, if it works out at all. Now, lately, Angel Studios has taken a bit of a leap of faith, excuse the expression, in the storytelling realm, starting with creating relatable characters and sequentially adding a dose of faith and message through that character. It's almost like they know how to make a good film. Um, so in Cabrini, director Monteverde strikes a fantastic balance between making the film one of faith and actually telling a moving story on its own. So the film begins with Mother Cabrini suffering from lung infections at her humble convent in Italy. When she receives a letter refusing to let her travel to China and establish an orphanage, she marches to Rome and confronts the Holy Father Pope Leo XIII. After some discussion, he relents, but on the condition that she successfully establish an orphanage for the Italian immigrants in New York City first. While they discover themselves unwelcome in the dingy borough of Five Points as Italian women, Cabrini and her nuns welcome the challenge and enlist the help of a prostitute named Vittoria and an Irishman, Dr. Murphy, to help them start up an orphanage. This is further inhibited by the mayor Gould, who pushes the bishop to make it harder for the nuns. With politics, society, and all odds against them, the nuns work harder than ever to make a home for the Italian children of New York. Now, this is not without struggle. Vittoria still has to deal with her past and needs to find a way to sever ties to her previous employer, to put it mildly. Dr. Murphy is stressed at the hospital, especially when a factory explodes, which also affects some of the children in Cabrini's care. Even Cabrini's spunky attitude, justified and well intentioned, gets her in trouble with the bishop and is sent back to Rome. In the wake of a fire set by arsons, Cabrini collects multiple investors to put down money for a new hospital and returns to New York City to finish the job. In the end, the mayor is impressed by Cabrini's surprising vivacity and allows her to continue her work without issue. You would have made an excellent man, he says, to which she responds, men could never do what we do. So the way I tend to think about movie reviews is sometimes I'll see a lot of movie reviews and they'll either have problems or talk about problems. And I have a bad habit of responding to objections before they come up, which may be why my videos tend to go a bit long. But there are some objections I would like to um, address. The reason is that the current climate is very touchy when it comes to male and female relations, as is shown in film. So, due to current Hollywood standards, movies are all too often ready to make women out to be better than men in all things which men are good at. As the Oakley song goes, anything you can do, I can do better. Now, the conservative, often Christian knee jerk reaction is to directly oppose this, to propound on the idea that women are not better than men, but that the two are equal. Now, in some ways, that is very true, but in a much more natural way, it isn't. Men and women are different. So it is harder to say that naturally, that is, according to their nature, they are equal. If two things are different, they cannot be equal in some capacity or another. Men and women are equal in dignity, but not in ability. Men are, in the grand scheme of things, more muscular, more spatially aware. These are just examples. Women, on the other hand, are much more gentle and nurturing, more emotionally aware. Men and women work differently and do different things well. So, in principal opposition to any objections to this final line of the film, it is not really a woke phrase, but rather a much more traditional view of men and women, the way they work in the world. Cabrini is not just a world mover establishing a foundation of orphanages that is eventually spread throughout the world, historically accurate, but is portrayed as a gentle motherly figure whose attention is focused on the Italian children of New York. To this end, she exudes her Italian spunk and attitude. Her strength comes from her love of the children rather than a desire to be a girl boss, the direction many movies in Hollywood tend to lean. Anyway, I thought that was relevant, so there's my soapbox on that. The film itself is riveting and visually spectacular. The characters, some real, many fictional, are simply well written and create a kind of cast that you can easily keep track of. There's a history and background for some of the protagonists, and even the bishop, while ultimately a pretty good guy in the end, has a complicated uh, um, antagonist protagonist situation, trying to save souls and keep his diocese intact while also helping Mother Cabrini work on her project. The film might have pushed the racism and sexism quite a bit, but we have to keep in mind that it was a different time, and immigrants were coming left and right and were tragically the target of many lynchings, especially Catholics. Historically, Catholics were treated just as many Jews are being treated today. People considered the Catholic Church to be too powerful and too much to be pushing their agenda on political measures and cultural measures. Well, too much. So, and that is why there was a lot of pushback on not only immigrants but Catholic immigrants. So that adds to the racism and sexism that applies in this film. The United States was barely 100 years old, and newcomers were, well, new. Now, I'm not justifying the evil that happened, but explaining why the film emphasizes it so much, because that is what Cabrini and her nuns had to go through. Also, that is just what movies do. They try to raise the stakes and the drama in order to make you provide the appropriate reason, rationale, and emotional experience that they are trying to convey in the film. It kind of serves itself in that way. It's a simple yet serious issue which keeps them from doing God's work, the nuns, throughout the film. It takes brains and courage to stick it out, and that is what the film is attempting to portray. This is all summed up in Marigold's attempts to stall and halt the completion of the orphanage. Now, I can never forget my favorite part of the film, which was the music. The sweeping score by Gene Beck had me engaged with the film as though in a trance, bringing little motifs and subtle transitions where appropriate. This is a big step up from Angel Studios' previous shot at Sound of Freedom, which had little to no music as it was. Speaking of transitions, the visuals were also quite impressive, with seeming one-shot montages throughout the film and clear references to The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, visually. It integrated very familiar and appealing sense of chiaroscuro, the likes of which are found in Caravaggio paintings, accompanied by a similar balance of light and dark themes depending on the scene. It's films like this that give me hope for the faith-based genre. To be honest, I wish it wasn't a genre, not because I don't like films about faith, but because I just want a good story with parts of the faith naturally written in. I saw some reviews that expressed disappointment that the film didn't make God a bigger deal and cause for Cabrini's mission than it depicted. Now, I have to say I heartily disagree. For one, God was definitely mentioned on several occasions, often in the context of Cabrini's mission. The whole pretext and understanding of a nun on a mission is to bring souls to God, and so they prioritize said souls. These souls are brought to God not through sermons, but by humans and human interactions, the good and the bad. The fact that they were able to make the mission so people-focused is what I particularly appreciated about this movie, that it didn't rely on Christian viewers alone to experience the impact of the people and recognize God's role in it. That's just how life works. Very few people consciously think about how God is actively driving everything. We believe in his plan and trust in him. As my boy Gus once put it, work as though all depended on you, pray as though all depended on God. I think Cabrini, both the character and the film, do an excellent job of doing work for the greater glory of God in the context of working with real humans in the real world. We need more films like this. Now to transition. Just a little bit ago, give it about a month now, because this video is late coming. I started watching Apple TV's hit show Ted Lasso. And while it's not for everyone, it is rated TVMA. I had a few takeaways from my own experience watching it. So here's the basic premise. The show features Ted Lasso, played by Jason Sudeikis, an American football coach who is unexpectedly recruited to coach a fictional English Premier League soccer team, AFC Richmond, despite having no experience coaching soccer, which is called football in England. So there's a little bit of joking around that. The team's owner, Rebecca Welton, gained ownership of the team in a divorce from her unfaithful ex-husband, Rupert. She has hired Lasso, secretly hoping he will cause the team's downfall and devastate Rupert, who cared more about AFC Richmond than anything else. Ted's charm, personality, and humor begin to win over Rebecca, the team, and those who had been skeptical about his appointment. So here are my takeaways. The first thing I noticed and loved about the show was the balance of optimism, flexibility, and reality of the character of Ted Lasso. In an age where dark, brooding characters take the spotlight, this show, being both a drama and a comedy, was able to portray the modern sense of optimistic protagonists that we had way back in the mid-20th century with the likes of Frank Capra or Andy Griffith. While this attitude doesn't totally protect Lasso from the reality and pain that comes with life, it's a taste of fresh air for those of us who experience the harshness of the real world. So I want to clarify a little bit. I wrote in my script here that they were able to portray the modern sense of the optimistic protagonist, like Frank Capra or Andy Griffith. One thing that I will say, and Andrew Clavin, I will credit for pointing this out first, is that this is a very secular show. They do not bring God into it, unlike the film I just reviewed, Cabrini. However, a character like Ted Lasso, as he is portrayed, would have been a God-fearing man. Rather, this is a secularized attempt to bring the charm and optimism of Frank Capra or Andy Griffith, who would have been God-fearing men. Anyway, that's one problem that the show has. It's not particularly honest with his character. So just so you are aware, a little later there are several spoilers ahead. So if you intend to watch the show without hearing these spoilers, I recommend you go to the timestamp label below. What's also important to this attitude of Ted Lasso is not just the freshness of his character and optimism on TV, but how it affects the story and the characters within it. With an almost innocent can-do attitude, Ted influences players to rise to whatever occasion of growth appears, and to give people who have hurt him a new lease on life. Examples include promoting his kitman, a kind of janitor character for the football team, the soccer team, a promotion when he witnesses his ingenuity and genius in football strategy, or simply not interfering personally or directly with a bullying problem, so that the captain of the team can do his job and lead his team, or when his boss, Rebecca, comes down to him at the end of the first season and confesses attempting to sabotage his team at every chance, only for him to forgive her completely. And this is only the first season. Due to the explicitly Catholic nature of my show, while I prefer to talk about things in a very human stance, I do want to let you know that there are problems I found with the show. As much as I loved and enjoyed the rest of everything else, there were some things that I figured I should point out. First, I mentioned something about forgiveness, I believe. And it's a powerful thing. Many people forget how hard forgiving someone can be. Even C.S. Lewis explained that people will often forget the difference between forgiving and excusing. Excusing makes something exterior to oneself the cause of one's failure. Forgiving is letting bygones be bygones and offering someone a chance to redeem themselves, even if they are indeed at fault for hurting you. When Ted forgives Rebecca for all she has done to try and make him fail, she is left speechless and immediately takes action to become a better person. That is the effect of true forgiveness, the true effect of forgiveness, which is very much part of the Christian faith. Confession is a sacrament which Christ left us so that we can not only psychologically but spiritually renew ourselves, and encourage us to keep going, keep being better human beings. And whose sins you forgive are forgiven, as he says to his disciples. Um, uh, um, I would pull more Bible quotes ad lib if I could, but I'm having a bit of a brain fart at the moment. So the real problems come uh in the third season. And so if you decide you don't want to watch the third season because of these problems, that is totally okay. Apple decides that it badly wants to become woke. And introduces two major characters, or relatively major characters, as homosexual. There are no explicit visuals, and that's one of the things I really liked about this film is there is sex involved in the show, but you don't really see anything. It's kind of lead up scenes and implications, right? Kind of the moments before and the morning after. No one is nude. In fact, one of the very first scenes we see Ted Lasso do, one of the very first things we see Ted Lasso doing when he gets to AFC Richmond is covering up a nude photo of a woman with tape. Yes, there's kissing and implied sex, as well as discussing it after the fact. Um, it was, I think, a rather unnecessary step in Apple's um storytelling, and I think it took away from the show a bit because it was very obviously forced. It didn't need to happen. So it really deducts points from the show once you get to the third season. But the first and second season are pretty amazing as far as the character arcs go. And there's still a bunch of the other characters whose arcs develop in the third season, and you get a final resolution at the end of it. And that's another thing that I really liked about this show is it had finality. It ended after the third season. Um, anyway, it's visually great. It's comedic. It's sweet. Um, for the most part, um, really honest to humanity. Um, and but it also does expose the difference between true Christian people and just Hollywood executives and what their vision of good people looks like. Um, Spoiler alert: Ted Lasso goes through a divorce, and that is, and they try to make it out to be a sacrificial thing, but it's really problematic. Um, because uh, it's not a sacrifice for the parents; it's a real sacrifice for the child that Ted Lasso has. His young son looks up to him and is at a very vulnerable age for a divorce to happen to his parents. And it really doesn't, it's very selfish on the writer's part because the writers and the Hollywood executives all go through these divorces, and they're trying to make themselves out to be heroes for their wives. It's not true. In Divorce is very problematic primarily for children and just breaks up families and makes everything go wrong. Anyway, that was another thing that Andrew Clavin pointed out, so I want to credit him again. Uh, so while all this stuff is on the show, I don't encourage that stuff in the show. I encourage all the other aspects, the growth of the captain, the growth of the bully, um, uh, how one of the women and girls on the show deals with her relationships. It tends to get better, and then it takes a nosedive because she's one of the homosexuals. She becomes one of the homosexuals. Um, and as for the homosexual thing, I'm not one of those conservatives who takes a full stance and hates on homosexuals. I detest homosexuality as a matter of principle. Homosexuality is unnatural. It is the opposite of what marriage is meant for. Marriage is meant for a man and a woman to come together, love one another, and create new life. Homosexuality does exactly the opposite, yada, yada, yada. I could go on a rant about this. I'm not going to do that for you, but the summary of it is you want to love the sin or hate the sin. You don't want to encourage this kind of behavior if you know people who uh, indulge themselves in this kind of behavior. But it's frustrating when a company like Apple tries to force or a studio tries to force that kind of and encourage that kind of behavior to its relatively normal audience who enjoyed the show for the most part. Anyway, I think Ted Lasso's approach to life is a refreshing thing, albeit has its issues. There is language, there is sexual implication and discussion. There is, but there, there's no violence, at least, right? But I care about the character arcs. The character arcs are fascinating, most of which are good through the 3 seasons, a couple of which are unnecessary in the 3rd season. So if your tolerance for that kind of behavior on screen is moderate, I highly recommend you go check out that show and watch it. Um, there's a lot to learn about how humans operate in this show. There's a lot to learn about how to lead others in this show, and not letting anything put you down. I wish I had a better conclusion for this. I went off script because I was trying to keep it from going too long, and I had to readjust how I thought about it. And how I wanted to say it. I just wanted to say my honest thoughts about it. It might be worth discussing in the comments. But along with those comments, please let me know what you want to hear about. What if you want me to do more interviews? I know people I can probably reach out who might be willing to do interviews like that. If there are topics you want me to discuss, movies you want me to discuss, please let me know in the comments below. Anyway, I'm Joe Alvarez. God bless. I'll see you guys next time on Cinematicians.